Thank you very much, Cheryl. That was wonderful. I want to move on with the program and invite Nina Rees and Lynn Woodworth to come up to the podium. Brief introduction. Nina Rees is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Previously, she was Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives with Knowledge University. She worked for 15 years in D.C., most recently as the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Innovation and Improvement at the U.S. Department of Education. She also served as a domestic policy advisor to the Vice President of the United States. Dr. James Lynn Woodworth, hereafter known as Lynn, is a quantitative research analyst at Stanford University's Credo arm. Before he joined Credo in 2012. Previously, he performed research, program evaluation, and administered performance pay programs as a distinguished doctoral fellow in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. Prior to that, he spent 11 years as a public school teacher in Arkansas. He earned a BA, magna cum laude, in music education, an MED in educational leadership from Arkansas Tech University, and a PhD in education policy at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that great introduction. Although if I knew that I was going to be speaking right after Ms. Henderson, I probably would have negotiated to go later or do it before. So it's a real honor for me to be here with you today. When Jamie reached out, I said yes without even looking at my schedule, only because I think what's about to happen here in Massachusetts in a few weeks is probably one of the most important elections when it comes to education reform in this country in modern history. I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. Jim wanted me to talk to you a little bit about what's going on at the national level with charter schools and how Boston and Massachusetts fit into that national picture. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about just that. We just celebrated the 25th anniversary of the charter school movement this year. This movement started literally 25 years ago back in June in Minnesota, where a group of bold legislators, Democrats and Republicans, came together to enact a law that at the time no one knew how much potential it would have in terms of growth. 25 years later, we now have a little over 6,700 public charter schools around the country in 43 states and in Washington, D.C. We serve nearly 3 million students every day. And we've seen a 10% year-over-year growth in the number of charter schools over the past 5 years around the country. We open roughly about 500 charter schools every year, and we've been closing roughly 150 to 200 charter schools every day. And this is important because for us, this is not just about opening new schools, it's also about making sure that our poor performing schools, or those that don't have enough students, are closing. And that, to me, is the key difference between charters and traditional public schools. In over 160 districts right now, at least 10% of the student population is in a charter school. And yet, we have close to 1 million names right now on charter school wait lists. So we're not keeping pace with the demand for public charter schools. Right here in Massachusetts, as you know, we have over 30,000 families whose children are on wait lists to attend charter schools. As far as academic outcomes, our good friend from Credo is going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening here in Massachusetts. But overall, the most robust studies of charter schools demonstrate one thing. We are effective at raising student achievement, especially among low-income students, among disabled students, and among English language learners in inner city settings. So all the major, robust, the best studies show that in inner city settings, our schools do better academically compared to district counterparts. As far as political support is concerned, we started pretty strong back then when Governor Clinton was running for president in the early 90s. He was charter schools' greatest advocate. He became president. He was one of the key leaders to put in place a federal program that gave seed funding for the growth of charter schools. That program has now received close to $3 billion in federal funding to launch new charter schools around the country and to replicate and expand effective models. And since his presidency, the future presidents, President Bush and the current president, President Obama, have been big supporters of public charter schools. So you may ask, after all this evidence, we have the numbers, We have density in certain communities. We have the human faces. We have the academic achievement. And what else do we need to do in order to expand? Well, if this were any other cause, I would say it would be easy to ask for more money at the federal and state level to expand. But the key thing we have against us right now is our opposition. Our opposition is noticing that as they expand, the number of teachers who are unionized drop. That's the key difference between a charter and a traditional school. You don't have to hire teachers who are part of the collective union bargaining agreement. So in that respect, the opposition is definitely taking note, and it's flexing its muscle. We did an analysis last year looking at the conversation about charter schools on social media, and we discovered that for every positive news story that any of your schools are posting or any of the advocates are posting, there are at least 3 to 4 negative tweets online against charter schools. Most of them are being promulgated by the unions, but that opposition is loud. It's loud, and up till now, we haven't really been paying that much attention to it, right? You don't want to pay attention to those who, my daughter who just started the 6th grade called the haters, right? That opposition, let me just say, so consistently when you do polling on charter schools, one of the things that's glaringly kind of obvious and has kind of warms my heart is that public support for charter schools is extremely high. The latest Education Next poll shows 65% in support of charter schools and 15% opposing it. That 15% has been steady ever since they started taking that poll. If you look at Phi Delta Kappa, which is another national polling organization, or an organization that also does a national poll on education, that 15% opponents of charters has remained steady over the years. Despite all the negativity and all the myths that they're promulgating. Which is interesting because when you actually probe those who support charter schools, a lot of them don't really know what they are. When we only have 6% of the market right now, and if you compare ourselves to the traditional public school system, but in terms of public support, the more you talk about charter schools, the more people like them. So it's very important for us to understand that the opposition is not fighting based on facts and data. They're simply basing their arguments on the same arguments that they put up when charter schools were first introduced. I was on a panel last year with Randy Weingarten where we were talking about the 10-year commemoration of Hurricane Katrina. We were talking about the progress that had happened in New Orleans since the district turned into chartering to reform its system. And if you talk to any researcher, and this was Tulane University researchers had done quite a bit of work looking at what had happened, but if you look at if you talk to any researcher, they will tell you that the achievement levels of students in New Orleans now are nothing compared to where they were 10 years ago. So passing rates among African American students have nearly doubled since the hurricane hit. Graduation rates have gone up from 50-some-odd% to over 70%. And the gap in achievement between the district and the rest of the state has nearly closed. Okay, this was unheard of 10 years ago. So when confronted with these data points, Ms. Weingarten's response was simply that we didn't go about creating the recovery district and starting these charter schools in a democratic way. We didn't consult with community leaders enough before we launched this experiment, so to speak. So she didn't even address the data at that point. Same is true in other areas. When we talk about our achievement rates, the key things that they have tried to talk about more and more is whether we are serving an equitable number of students who are disabled or English language learners. Again, mind you, in some communities, you may be talking about just a handful of charter schools, and so to compare 2 or 3 charter schools' enrollment share for disabled students and ELL students compared to the whole system is pretty ridiculous. But that is how the opposition is attacking us. And of course, the other thing that comes up quite a bit and has come up a lot actually with the political parties who are running for president right now is the original intent. The fact that some believed when charters were first created that they were just going to be laboratories of innovation designed to transfer that knowledge to the traditional system. And to be honest with you, I looked at the preambles of all the different charter school laws in the 43 states that passed it, a few of them talked about that, but most of them enacted charter school laws to empower their teachers to come up with new ways of teaching in the classroom. Most of them passed it in order to make sure that low-income students had access to better schools. If you recall, in many states, this was a direct response to the voucher movement, right? So it's important for us to focus on the fact that the opposition is not in this business to help us out, to make our system better, but to fight us because, in their opinion, we're simply taking money away from what they consider to be their funding. So the stakes are fairly high this November when the voters go to the ballot to lift the cap on your charter school law. We've done this in recent history twice, in Georgia and in Washington State a few years ago. But those situations were very different than what you have here in Massachusetts. You have this is probably the bluest state I can think of that's considering this initiative. But know that regardless of what happens, and my friend from Credo is going to talk to you a little bit more about this, know that Boston, as was mentioned earlier, has the best charter schools in the country. This is the place that took authorizing seriously from day one. This is a place that had what's considered a smart cap, something that a lot of other states and districts are currently trying to put in place. So despite everything that you have done correctly, you're still being fought and opposed, and that is simply kind of an indication of what's more to come. So if we want to win these battles, we need to become much better at advocacy. This is not just about educating low-income students, it's about making sure that we have the wherewithal and the drive to really fight the opposition in order to make sure that our students have access to better schools. Thanks for having me.
May take a second to get all the technology woken up here. All right, sorry about the delay here. We've got a little bit of a technology snafu. So let me go ahead and get started while we're waiting for everything to reboot. I want to say that at Credo, we are numbers people. We believe in letting the data speak. And I will tell you right now, I am a numbers nerd. If I get a little too technical or get something into some territory where you get lost, please let me know. I'll try to rein that in. But one thing that makes us different than some of the other speakers here is we're actually not necessarily pro-charter. We are pro-good educational options for kids. In fact, at Credo, we have recommended the closure of a number of charter schools. And I authored a paper that came out last year about online charter schools that was actually pretty damning. I think most people, if you've seen that paper, you understand that. So when we talk about the schools in Boston, which I would love to show you some examples of. As soon as the computer decides to cooperate. When we talk about the charter sector in Boston, we're looking at numbers from individual test scores. We're looking at, and we're not looking just at achievement, but we're looking at growth. So one of the things that Credo does is we match students who are enrolled in charter schools with students who are enrolled in traditional public schools. We match students based on their demographics, so based on their race, ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their grade, their gender, all these various characteristics, and we also match them on prior test scores. So when we show you numbers, which I'm hopefully going to have for you soon, we also are looking at, like I said, not just the achievement, because achievement is one thing, but we're looking at growth. Because if a school takes in a high-achieving child and doesn't do anything with them, that's not a success. If a school takes in a low-achieving child and moves that child forward, even if they're still low-achieving, that is real success. It's all about academic growth. And what we see in Boston is a huge amount of academic growth taking place in the charter sector. Almost there. So I want to start off, and then hopefully we'll get this up and running, and I'll be able to catch up with the slides. We'll talk first about the charter sector in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, the vast majority of schools in the traditional setting are actually in the suburbs. You are mostly a suburban state. However, in the charter sector, 50% of the charter schools in the state of Massachusetts are actually in urban settings. And this really comes into play because a few years ago, Credo produced a study where we looked specifically at students in urban settings across the country who attend charter schools. And what we found was a phenomenal amount of growth going on for these students in these urban sectors. Now, in Massachusetts, your charter schools tend to have more African American students in them than the traditional public schools do. Again, this goes along with being in the urban sector. They also have a higher percentage of Hispanic students. Well, this is really important because one of the findings that has come out of Credo's work and also work by Susan Dynarski and Roland Fryer and several other researchers is that the students who most benefit, have the strongest academic gains from attending a charter school are the students who are minority students and students who are in poverty. And these are exactly the students that you see attending charter schools in the state of in the state of Massachusetts, specifically in the city of Boston. Now, how large are these impacts? Well, the impacts in Boston are approximately 0.25 standard deviations. So there's a bit of a geek speak, so let me translate that to you. 0.25 standard deviations equates to approximately 1 year of learning. Okay, let's make sure everyone caught that. The effect sizes that we see for African American students in Boston is 0.25 standard deviations, which equates to 1 year of additional learning per year. So that means for every year that these students spend in a charter school, they're catching up a year on the traditional setting. They're outperforming where they would be by a year. Here we go. We're finally there. So we said. So as I was saying, the increased growth that we see from students attending charter schools in Boston is huge. When people ask us, where do charter schools work? We say Massachusetts. That's our first go-to. After that, we say New Orleans. That's our second place that we recommend. But we're here to tell you guys that, quite frankly, based on the numbers, and hopefully shortly I'll be able to show you some of those numbers, charter schools in Massachusetts work. They work better than any other place in the country. It's not just our studies that have shown this. There have been several others that have shown this too, including randomized control trials, which are considered the gold standard of studies. These are the same type of studies they use in medical trials and such. And all these studies point the same direction. And that is, in Massachusetts, charter schools work. Now, nationally, it's slightly better in reading and about the same in math for charters. But here, the numbers are through the roof. In fact, every time we do a study in Massachusetts, we go back and rerun the numbers because we have a hard time believing them. I mean, they are that incredible. And the technology demons have been exorcised. Almost. All right, so we claim. So again, here's a real quick overview. I'm going to kind of rush through some of these slides because I've already covered some of the content. But again, we see here this is the breakout of schools by what's called locale by the federal government. And you can see most of the schools in Massachusetts are in fact suburban schools. But when we look at charters, we see that, again, 50% of the charters in the state are actually serving urban students. Okay, and the reason this matters is because those students that they serve, we look at Boston demographics, are the students who are best served. There we can see the growth rate that we've had in Boston in charter schools. Most of the students that enroll in a charter school came from an urban setting. Okay, so what we're doing is we're having kids from urban schools go to urban schools. This is the race ethnicity mix of the traditional public schools in Boston. TPS is traditional public schools, yes. This is the race ethnicity mix in the urban charter schools in Boston. As you can see, the percentage of students who are African American students who attend these schools is much higher than what you see in the traditional setting. We had some talk earlier about the students who are in poverty, students who are ELL, students who are special education students and attending charter schools. So this is the traditional schools. And these are the charter schools. And yes, we do see a lower percentage of students in ELL attending charter schools, but the ratio for students who are special ed is about the same between the two sectors. And in fact, there are a higher percentage of students in poverty who make up the enrollment in a charter school than the traditional schools. So these schools are in fact serving a diverse population of students. Now, we talk about impact. These are those numbers I referred to earlier. The numbers on the left are the growth rates for the traditional public schools in Boston. The zero line there is the average Massachusetts growth rate. So you can see that the traditional public schools in Boston do have a positive growth, but the numbers on the right, the green and the orange, those are the growth rates for the charter schools in Boston. And as you can see, there's a large effect there, and the effect is the difference in the size of those two bars. And you can see on the graph on the bottom left, we're talking about 0.23 standard deviations in reading. Again, 0.25 is approximately 1 year's worth of growth. And the 0.31 in math. Now, these are annual numbers. So these are the annual gains that students in charter schools in Boston make over students in a traditional public school setting who look just like them, who attended the same schools that the charter students used to attend. When we look at charter schools in Boston compared to the other schools in the area of Boston, are they doing better or are they doing worse? Well, the number on top, that's the national average. The numbers on the bottom for Boston, you can see 81% of charter schools in Boston outperform the traditional schools in reading. 92% of charter schools in Boston outperform the traditional public schools in math. You'll notice there's only 2 colors in the Boston bar. That's because 0% of charter schools in Boston had weaker growth than the traditional public schools. Okay? 0% of charter schools in Boston do worse than their comparison schools. 92% do better in math. It's very hard to argue that charter schools in Boston are not successful, that charter schools in Boston are not raising the growth for students. And again, Credo has made friends and enemies on both sides of the issue because we have called out places where charter schools have not done as well. In fact, our 2009 study was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people when we said on average charter schools were not doing better. And then we found in 2013, with time, the charter schools had improved. And then we started doing these breakouts by location. And when we got to Boston, like I said, we literally ran the numbers and then we ran them again because we couldn't believe the size of the impact and the effectiveness that we were seeing was correct. And we had to go back and verify that, yes, these are real numbers. These are real improvements. And these are real kids who are getting real growth. So I appreciate your willingness to sit through our technical difficulties. I do want to step aside. I know there's a lot of other people to speak today. I believe after the panel, they're looking at there's opportunity for questions. And if you need more information on some more of the details, I'll be happy to speak with you after the presentations.